we become inspired by great businesses. Disney settles for nothing less than greatness. As you look around, all the intricate details of every hotel, of the berms while you're inside and how it encompasses you in each park is nothing short of spectacular. They've put all the thought into doing this. And so I want to read you something here on the screen. And I want you to imagine walking into a hotel where every detail seems to anticipate your needs. As you approach the entrance, the doors swing open effortlessly and you're greeted by name as if they've been expecting you all along. The smell of freshly brewed coffee fills the air, and before you even have to ask, your favorite drink is ready, perfectly made just the way you like it. You glance around and notice the space is spotless, every corner thoughtfully designed to make you feel at ease. The music playing softly in the background improves your mood, and every staff member you encounter makes you feel like they're the only person that matters. This is straight from the book of Josh Coffey's mind. I should probably write a book on this, huh? So, of course, we're Disney. I had to write that. And, how would you feel as a hotel guest if this happened? You walk in and they knew exactly what drink you wanted. And maybe the music isn't just like putting you at ease, but they're literally playing your favorite band. Like, how in the world did they figure out my favorite band? Imagine if that was how you were treated when you walked in. You'd probably feel pretty important. And you'd probably be satisfied with the fact that you're staying at that hotel. And you'd probably be willing to tell everybody about it. Have you ever gone somewhere or had an experience buying from a company or staying somewhere that you had that? Has anybody had that? It's interesting. So the first time, I was actually referred to this book by my aunt, who is, she's ironic. She's an HR director for a hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona called The Princess, and it's a 5-diamond hotel. And she first told me, like, something that inspired me, and then she ended up recommending this book because I was like, this is so interesting. How do you guys operate? And she said, actually, we operate a lot based on how Disney does. And she told me that she had, she said that she heard, and all of their staff has to think like this. This can't be a one-person way of thinking. It has to be a cultural way of thinking. And she had somebody that was coming to stay with them for a month because in Arizona, it's the Maya Clinic, I think is what it's called. Or Mayo Clinic. Mayo, thank you. So Mayo Clinic is like, in Scottsdale in particular, is really well known for their treatment of cancer. And so she had a guest that was coming in, and they were staying in the Princess for 30 days. Well, the Princess, 5-diamond hotel, it is not cheap to stay in. He was spending like crazy amounts of money just to be there, to be in comfort. He's in his dying days, but there's this glimmer of hope for him. And so the staff, as soon as they realized why he was staying for a month, when he arrived, they had actually gone on his Facebook. They had found photos of him and his family. They had printed them out. They had framed them. They were hanging on the walls. He had it by his bedstand. And when he walked in, they through their due diligence of social media, had his fridge filled with things that they knew he loved, with his favorite coffee in this room, with his own coffee maker and all of the stuff that he needed as soon as he arrived. And to me, that was inspiring. I'm like, that's incredible. Like, how in the world do you do that? And she said, it has to be a cultural difference. It can't be a person difference. And then she recommended this book. And so I want to reframe this, and I want to rework this a little bit. So imagine shopping an online store where every detail seems to anticipate your needs. As you approach each collection, the navigation menus open effortlessly, and you're greeted with precisely the right products, as if they've been expecting you all along. Very important here. The smell of freshly brewed coffee fills the air. Has to remain the same. And before you even have to ask, your questions are answered with great clarity on the page. You glance around and notice that there are loads of reviews, every element thoughtfully designed to make you feel at ease. The ease of checking out improves your mood, and every communication leading up to the arrival of the product on your doorstep makes you feel like you're the only person that matters. And I want you to picture applying the same level of care and thoughtfulness to your business. And it's interesting because, we think of hotels, right? And we're like, well, hotels, and we make the excuse. Well, hotels have this ability to create this experience that is different and online. But as you can see here, there's a lot of things we could do to make the customer's experience better. Last night, actually, Allison Coons with Pacific Hound walked up and showed us all of her new products that she's super excited about getting manufactured now. And she shows us the new packaging that delivers her products. It's not a white bag, it's custom branded. And it makes you feel a certain way. You look on the packaging and it has the mountains, it says Pacific Hound on it. And then you see the dog and the person walking with the dog on the mountains. It's really cool. You feel a certain way when you see things like that. And so what would it look like if your customers were not just like buyers and transactions, but rather they were relationships. And they were these people that you treated like a guest that you would have at your house, not just a customer that's staying for a day. And what would it look like in your business if you did that? What would your growth look like? And the companies, I believe, with the highest lifetime value, they don't sell products, they create experiences that make customers feel welcome, appreciated, and eager to come back. And they figured out how to make people talk about them long after the transaction is over. And I believe that the way that this happens is by shifting from what we all call a B2C or business to consumer mindset to a heart-to-heart relationship with your customers. And so you may not call your customers guests. I don't call you guests, I call you clients. I mean, maybe you're a guest here for us, but you're a client. And so what would it look like if we shifted our mindset from the things that we're trying to do from business to consumer? Like business to consumer is based on transaction. It's based on revenue growth. It's based on profit, and that's great. But if you move to this heart-to-heart relationship model and you put your customer first and say, how do I cultivate an environment in which they will buy from me and refer and want to tell everybody about me just based on their experience, what would happen? How would your world change? How would your business change as a result of that? And you might say, I'm in the e-commerce space. Like, Josh, I sell products. I'm not like Disney that has guests coming in person. I sell online and they don't get to meet me in person. I'm different, right? You might sell products, but the reality is like you're in the service business. That's why most big companies have like service departments or customer support departments. They have different names for it, but it's all service. How you serve your customers is still a part of your business. But a lot of times it's so easy to get focused on the marketing component that we're just constantly trying to fight for the next dollar, fight for the next customer, and we're just churning through people. And even if you're not we think of churn usually from like subscription box. So like Nicole and Katie over here have to deal with actual churn for people that pay them every month for Bunny Box and GPig Box. But everybody has natural churn. If you sell one-off products, you have natural churn. Taylor, with his soap brand, are churning people. I mean, people come back and buy it, but the repurchase rates eventually do this, and they eventually begin to go down. And so what would happen if we could shift the entire way that happens? And I believe doing this, though, requires a lot more than you're probably doing right now. Like a lot more. You might be doing what you consider a lot, but if you actually step back and look at it, there's a lot more that you can do. And there's a higher touch that you can do. And a lot of times we don't do it because we're so focused on like, well, does it scale? Is this gonna scale? But if you were heart to heart and really focused on that, the scale is gonna become a byproduct of actually doing that. And so what I wanna do is I wanna help you sprinkle like extra magic on your customers and say, how do we cultivate an experience for them, for me, that looks different than other people? We don't look like Disney. We personally, the Ecommerce Alley does not look like you. Your business is different than ours. And we have to stop for a moment and say, what will this look like for me? And this is what I call, and I believe that if we could do this right, people are gonna feel special. They're gonna stay loyal. They're gonna tell everybody about you. You're gonna make a lot more money and a lot more profit, especially when you're not having to acquire customers only with ads, which ads are great. And of course, we love them. But that does have costs associated with it. And referrals, they're gravy, right? They're just like, they buy really easy and they're just, all the profit is there. And so I believe this happens in something that I'm calling the lifetime loop. And this is on page 8, So there are two phases of the lifetime loop. And if you do it right, you're gonna have what I call a desirable situation. And the desirable situation looks like this. People come in, they buy your stuff. And then you make them really happy. Yay, we're happy. And so what happens is, if we're following the loop here, if this is the customer's level of happiness and your level of happiness, then what happens is they come in, they're getting excited, they buy the stuff, here's the purchase. Then they get real excited until the peak moment of happiness when they receive the product and they see it come to life, right? It's right in front of them. I got the dog collar. I got the soap. I smelled it. It's freaking incredible. I've used it. I love it. And then there's this pace of like, okay, now the kind of happiness wears off a little bit. But then over time, you start nurturing them more. They get emails. They see your ads a little bit. They start to see more. And then eventually they get to this point where like, okay, well, you know what? They buy stuff, happy. They buy more stuff. And then they're like, oh, heck yeah, now I am really happy, right? If we can cultivate an environment in which they're really happy, and then it goes through the same process, and then they go up and they buy more, bigger stuff. I don't know if that's grammatically correct, but more bigger stuff, and then that makes them super duper happy. And if we can do this, it's gonna cultivate a desirable situation for everybody. You're happy, super duper happy, your customers are super duper happy, you make a lot more money, they are satisfied with your products, and they go back and buy again, and they refer a lot of people to you. Or if you do it wrong, you're gonna have an undesirable situation where they buy stuff, the moment they place the order, there's a glimmer of like, okay, this was a horrible process at the bottom, and then maybe there's this glimmer of hope that it's gonna get better when it arrives, and then it arrives, and you know what, that was the same amount of happiness I had when I buy, and then now, it goes down, and they're not happy, and they never buy again. So this is, we'd probably all agree, a less desirable or undesirable situation. And so you looking at the lifetime loop, if you look at this, the break point is making them really happy, right? That's pretty much the break point. So if you're churning and you're finding that people are buying once and they're done, you're probably living in an undesirable lifetime loop. There's really no loop. It's like one loop and then it's down versus the loop, and that's a great place to live. And so the break point is, can I make them extremely happy with the experience that I've created for them right out of the gates? And so we want to cultivate this environment that continually makes our customers happy. And the best way I've learned to do this is increasing the perceived value of you. And I call this the customer value flow. And so if we're looking at, so kind of like the lifetime loop, there's actually two situations. You have a desirable situation and an undesirable situation. Let's start with the undesirable situation, which I believe is most people. So if you look at this, you have, and I have a little color chart here. So the red are non-customers. They have yet to make a purchase. The yellow are first-time customers. Yay, they're in the customer value flow. Like they're in here. I got this database of customers in the little funnel here. But if they're not super happy and the value goes down, I mean, mathematically, you're gonna have some people that make it out and become repeat customers, which are green. And so eventually you'll get repeat customers mathematically, right? Out of 100 people, you're gonna get a percentage that become repeat customers. But the challenge is, if the value starts to come to this constraint, there is a point of them stopping buying, right? So between the first purchase and the last purchase or last renewal, if you're a subscription, right, there is a point where they eventually stop. And so when they eventually stop, your profit goes down and you have to constantly churn and get more non-customers. And so I look at these red dots and almost look at these as like, these are really ads, right? All of these red dots are people that we're acquiring with ads, and they're the most expensive to get. But occasionally what happens is you get people in your funnel, they buy the first time, and then you have the green dots, repeat customers, and it's kind of hard to see here. Maybe on your workbook it would be better, but we have referred repeat customers. There's a little blue outline on the green. So if you look close, we have a repeat customer, but there's a blue outline, because the blue are the referrals. So eventually you get people that refer. So in this case, we might get one referral in this scenario, and then you have some people that are like first time, they've only bought once and they're a referral. But then you get these people like, oh, they're referred repeat customers, right? So now they're referred from a repeat customer. And that's really good, right? Because now they're a repeat customer and they came from an existing customer that didn't require ads. So this is where the snowball effect can begin to happen. And so this is a less desirable scenario, and most people actually live in this, where we fight for the first purchase, we build it based on the upfront initial transaction, but then after that, I mean, the value goes down. The communication is just pretty stock. Like I get the stock Klaviyo emails, for example, I get it, and then it's just there's not a whole lot of touch point. Maybe the product packaging is bare minimum because all your focus is on the marketing, when it's like, well, what if you actually created this environment in which people were extremely happy and they kept buying, and then you didn't have to pay for them again, because paying to acquire them is the most expensive point. So this is the undesirable, and I would say that I believe like the best way to fix this is by adding a lot more value to your customers. And it was kind of interesting because I just find myself in like life situations that are always relevant to what I'm literally about to do a podcast or training on. It's really convenient for me. And Dylan and I, we drove down here from Ohio. I don't recommend it. It's like 16 hours without stops. But it's always really good because Dylan and I have a lot of good conversations. And so we had a trailer of all of this gear and lighting and screens and stuff like that we had to hold down here. And Dylan and I are coming down, and we stop in Atlanta because we knew Cliff was there, by the way. And we're like, all right, we got to stop by someone. So we stop in Atlanta, and we park the car at the hotel, and we like walk down to this Mexican restaurant. I don't know does anyone else like Mexican restaurant food? Okay, great. And margaritas, great. So we go to this place called Zama's. Never heard of it in my life. I think it's just local there. And we go to this place called Zama's, and we eat a lot of Mexican food. In the Ecommerce Alley, we have a place called Tacos and Tequila. We go there. We're probably their largest customer. I mean, our lifetime value has got to be like 10 grand in the last 2 years. We spend a lot of money at Tacos and Tequila. And so, of course, our first thing is like, well, let's find a Mexican joint. So we find this Mexican joint, and we walk down to it. And if you're not familiar with most Mexican joints, and I don't want to bucket them all together, it's usually like 6,000 food items made of 6 different total ingredients, and it's, for the most part, relatively bland. Occasionally, like, they'll be good. And then, like, the chips, and this is a pet peeve of mine, because I love salt, but the chips never have salt on them. And it's kind of like, you go in, it's like a mediocre environment. And for me, vibe is really important. Like, when we go out as a team, first thing I'm looking at is I'm like, I don't care about the menu. Show me the vibe. And I go to Google and I just look at the images and I'm like, I love vibe. How I feel when I'm eating is really important to me. Super nerdy like that. So we go into this place, no expectation. We're like, we're gonna go in, we're gonna get some fajitas or something like that, maybe a margarita, and then we're gonna call it a night and meet up with Cliff in the morning for breakfast. And we go to this place, and there's a full-time doorman at the front of this restaurant. And we're walking up, he's like, gentlemen, welcome. And he opens this door, and I didn't think of anything. And I'm like, all right, thanks. And we just kind of walk in, and then they go, and they give us our server, and he walks us, and he sits Dylan and I down, and we sit down, and we're looking at the menu, and this is the coolest vibe ever. I'm like, I've never seen a Mexican restaurant this cool. We're in there, we're looking through the menu, the guy comes over, he asks us what we're drinking. I was like, well, I'm gonna do this. He's like, I'll tell you what. So this is a new flight, and that watermelon margarita you want is in this flight, but you're gonna get it, and you're gonna be able to try these other 3 ones, and he just upsells us like nothing. And we're like, okay. And then we tripled our lifetime value on drinks. And then after that, he comes back and he says, hey, well, do you want any appetizers? And we love queso. So we're like, all right, we're gonna get some queso that's $5.99. He's like, hey, listen, that queso is really good. But there's this, it's called the Texan queso, and it's our #1 bestseller. People rave about it. It's my personal favorite. It has shrimp in it, it has steak, it has chicken, and it comes out over this like little flame thing. And then I was like, you had me at shrimp, chicken, and steak in queso. I didn't know that existed on this planet. And so that was $17 queso. So we're like, all right, whatever. So we took it and we get the queso, and then he comes back, and this whole process continues the whole way through, checking in constantly. It was the best experience I've had at a restaurant in a pretty good while, like just in general restaurants. And it was a great experience. And at the end, the first thing he asked me is he says, hey, is this your guys' first time here? And we said, yeah, we're from not nearby. And he's like, oh, that's awesome. And he runs us through everything. Well, at the end, he comes up and takes all of our stuff away. And he's like, do you want dessert? And we're like, dude, we just ate all this queso and this flight of margaritas we can't even finish. And all of this food is too much. We didn't even finish half of it. And he's like, all right, that sounds good. And then like 2 minutes later, a manager walks down, and he just comes down and he places this plate in front of us that looks like this. Welcome to Zama. We just told him we didn't want dessert. He didn't care. He came by and he's like, welcome to Zama. And then he has these 2 little sweet chip things with chocolate and whipped topping and a cherry on top. And he gives us this right here. This says something sweet for your next visit. And we had a free appetizer on them. I'm like, I don't live in Atlanta, but if I ever trek down to Florida again, I'm going through Atlanta and I'm gonna redeem this. Hopefully there's not a timestamp on it, because it was the best experience ever. And we went down and they brought us this whole process. The manager comes out, puts this in front of us, And the server's name was Dylan too. And he said, hey, Dylan said you guys didn't want dessert, but hey, this is on us. We just want to say thank you. Your next visit, appetizer is on us as well. And then Dylan comes down after and he sees this. Just if you're wondering, we did actually eat all of it. So he comes and he sees this. He's like, oh, I hope my writing was, you can actually read my writing because I actually made that for you. And I'm like, you like made our dessert for you? He's like, yeah, I went back there and I made it for you. And I'm like, this is the craziest experience I've ever had at like a restaurant in a pretty long while, let alone a Mexican joint. And so this kind of stuff leads to, and I'm telling all of you right now about this. And 2 days ago, Dylan and I and the team, they flew in and we kind of arrived at the same time. And it was like Sunday or Monday. And everybody's huddled around in Dylan's computer and he's showing them these photos, talking about this experience and I took a photo of it, but we don't have it. It's kind of funny because they're all huddled around him as he's telling the story about this Zama's experience of these photos. And now I'm telling all of you. And so like, that's the power of what happens if we aren't so focused on the transaction, but we're focused on cultivating this experience that makes people want to stand on stage and tell everybody about the flight of margaritas they had and this great experience. It's pretty crazy. And so that creates the secondary scenario that I would say this is probably the desirable scenario, right? Where we have the same little icons up there, non-customers, first time, repeat, and referrals. But what happens is we open up the value. We say, what are those dials we can turn to create this value for our customers in the process and in the post-purchase process? A lot of times we get customers, we just forget about them. We're like, oh, they bought from us, awesome. Here's like this 3.5 email post-purchase series they get the emails, and then now they're in the main email flow and they get the weekly emails. And then we just sell them stuff, right? And so a lot of times that's the process. But what happens if we could just open up the value and say, how do we increase this value flow? Well, what would be the desirable scenario is that we then have that first purchase and we get a lot of people in, but you see a lot more blue dots in the front, in the middle. You see a lot more blue dots that have not yet made the purchase, but they have been referred to you. They dropped them a link or they said, hey, you need to check this out. But then the most important thing is you get to the end and you have a lot more people that don't stop buying, but they buy again. And then you get little blue dots with blue circles that are referred repeat customer referrals. I didn't have a fancy term for it, so that's like what I came up with. But we get these referred people that we never had to pay for. We had a repeat customer refer somebody, and that referred person bought once, and then they became a repeat referred buyer who referred somebody else who also did that. So it's like this, it's like inception, right? So if we can continue to increase this value and ask ourselves the questions of how do we open up the flow of value, our customers will spend a lot more, we'll make a lot more profit, and we won't have to always be fighting for next customer, next customer, next customer, and just churning through people on the front end because that's a really expensive way to live. And a good question to ask yourself, actually, this is a great question you should ask yourself, is how do I 2 times lifetime value with half the spend? Right? That'd be an interesting question. Like, what if you could spend half the amount on your ads, but you were able to increase your lifetime value times 2? You would that's a 4x, right? Because you're cutting in half and then you're doubling it. So that's a 4x increase from what you're doing. And that's a great question to answer. What if, with the same exact ad spend, instead of trying to increase my ad spend, what if I asked a question, instead of increasing the ad spend by getting my ads to produce 20% better, what if I just was able to increase my lifetime value 20%? Does the same thing, right? But I don't have this fixed cost of ads that are going out. And so this is what I have coined the term, the customer value flow. And if we could create a desirable scenario, it's going to actually really help us not have to spend as much money on ads and create this environment in which people refer and they just buy again and again and again. And what I want you to ask yourself is this. This is an interesting series of questions to ask yourself. You know, if I never ever lost another customer, like every customer you've ever got, if you never lost another one and they only bought from you for your types of products, how much faster would your business grow? Or how much more profit would you have if they never, ever left? They bought and they never bought from anyone else. They're like, hey, I bought from Molly Goodall and I'm buying every single coat for my kids from Molly Goodall until she's a size that they can't buy from. What if they just grew? What if every candle or scent that I ever bought from Doreen was the only place? I don't buy anywhere else. I literally only buy from Doreen. Like there are some people that are like, I don't buy from anyone but Starbucks. Starbucks is the best coffee on the planet. And I don't feel that way, but you know, Starbucks is all right. But some people feel that way. They won't buy anywhere else. They'll like drive by Tim Hortons, they'll drive by Dunkin' Donuts, they'll drive by the little local coffee shop that is actually like a small batch roastery and they are masters of it, and they'll go to Starbucks, it's like mass produced. And so what would happen if you were able to cultivate an environment in which nobody ever did that? How much more profit would you have? How many more referrals would you get? Like surely if you were the only place they ever bought from, surely they would refer to you, right? If they're like, hey, I don't get my guinea pig boxes from anyone but Nicole and Katie. Well, surely they'd probably refer other guinea pig friends and parents to you. How much more would you be able to invest, or how much more would you invest in improving your customer experience if you knew that they would never leave? Like how much more could you invest in doing that and allocate from a dollar standpoint? Or how much better would you feel about your business? Like knowing that every customer that ever bought from you just loved you. Like how would you feel about that? To know that you have this group of people that are just like, oh yeah, Allison is the best. Bonnie is the best. How would you feel about that? How would your team feel about that? Like how much more pride would your team have working at your company? It's really cool. So I encourage everybody, as you're around the Disney premises, talk to the cast and ask them like, oh, what's it like working for Disney? Most of them will tell you the same thing. It's magical. It's amazing. Like it's real. And the interesting thing is, and we were talking about this on the way down, if you go to like Glassdoor and you start looking around like, oh, like how much do people working at Disney make? What's interesting is they are like right on par with just the whole rest of the world. Or sometimes in certain roles, maybe below par. But the reality is they create such a culture and a place that their team all have pride working here. The two people that helped us, Drew and Kate, who have helped orchestrate this thing for like 6 straight months. They were in here last night and we're talking through and we're going through everything. I was like, well, how long have you worked here? And she was like, I've worked here for 9 years. And I'm like, Kate, what about you? She's like, 2 years, but I did 4 years in college and all this stuff. And I was like, what's it like working here? And they're like, it's literally the best. We don't want to work anywhere else. Like, that's amazing. Like, yeah, we literally get to create happiness every day for people like you guys. Like we get to create these environments and orchestrate excursions and cool things. And so how much more pride would your team have knowing that, hey, every customer that ever comes to us, yeah, they lock in and they spend like $1 gazillion because they never ever leave. How much more would you invest in developing new products to better serve them and increase your lifetime value? Speaking of Starbucks, there's a book called Onward. It's actually a really, really great book. There's a book called Onward, looks like this. It's super dense. I think that's an accurate representation size-wise. It's a really big book, but it's called How Starbucks Fought for Its Life Without Losing Its Soul. And it's fantastic book. And in it, Howard Schultz, he breaks down like the impact that focusing on like a customer-centric business had on Starbucks. Because Starbucks, by the way, was not what they are today. Like Starbucks now has these atmospheres that people just want to go sit and drink coffee forever and just sit in and work all day long. Like they've created this environment that like people are like, screw co-working space, I'm just gonna go work at Starbucks. And they used to not be like that. They used to be like lower quality coffee than they are right now. And they were just constantly just like a regular coffee shop, just churning stuff. They didn't really care about quality a whole lot, kind of like Joffrey's coffee here. And so they didn't really care a whole lot about that. And then Howard Schultz is like, we have to change some things here. And then what was interesting is they decided to focus on customers more than marketing. Of course, now they're back at that, but they were able to answer a very big question of how do we basically open up this value? How do we create an experience that people feel connected, they feel status, and they just only buy Starbucks? And in doing this is pretty interesting. They're able to figure out the customers on a 20-year period of time spend $14,099, which like my first thought is that is a lot of $5 coffees. My second thought is, let's run some numbers on this because that's pretty sweet. So if we had a $14,099 lifetime value, but that's over 20 years, right? That's a long time. That'd be $794.95 per year. We would have $58.74 in sales per month. Okay, like cool. And that'd be, according to most coffee margin, by the way, is about 70%. So you would have about $41 in profit per month. Now I'm like, all right, I'm an advertiser and I speak in terms of customer acquisition costs and stuff like that. So let's look at this. Let's pretend that I ran the worst campaign ever to get a $5 coffee. And I spent I had $100 CAC. Let's just assume that Starbucks sucked at marketing in the beginning and they just ran $100 CAC to get a $5 coffee. If you look at that, it would take a while, but like in 1 year, they'd have a 5.56 ROI. And within 20 years, that's a 98.69 ROI. And that's why, that doesn't include, by the way, this is one person. This doesn't include the blue dots, the referred people, the referred repeat people, the referred repeat people. This is like one person. Like if I bought someone and I just kept them for 20 years, they'd spend $14,099 with us. That's what would start to happen over that period of time. And that's why Starbucks can pay any amount of money pretty much and acquire a customer and still be profitable. Of course, there's stuff like, hey, how long do I have to float the gap before I'm profitable and all that good stuff, right? But if you look at this and you start thinking in terms of more than 1 day or 7 days or 30 days, you start to realize like, ooh, if I created an experience that had people staying with me this long and spending $14,099 with me, what would begin to happen? And so when they took their shift and they focused on this customer experience, they started focusing on the quality of the coffee. Howard Schultz goes over to Europe. They weren't doing espresso-based stuff. Starbucks was one of the first places in America to really bring espresso-based drinks to America. It wasn't a common thing. It was all drip coffee. And then he goes over to Europe and he realizes in Europe, literally drip pot coffee is not even existent. Like in Europe, I don't know if anyone's been to Europe. If you go ask them for like a regular coffee or Americano, they're like, classic, Everyone there it's all espresso-based stuff. Most shops just have espresso-based. So he brought that back, really focused on the experience for the customers, and that's what ended up happening. And then once you solve that question, then you could pump the advertising, the marketing, because now your confidence that we were talking about not too long ago, the confidence goes up, right? When you're able to create that. And so what's interesting is they answered the $10 million questions and now they're on like the $100 billion questions. Like that's what they're trying to do. And the right questions lead to the right answers. And so John Maxwell has this great quote and he says, to add value to others, if we're talking about value, to add value to others, one must first value others. And in other words, relationship becomes greater than transaction. And there's this company out there. I don't know if anyone else is a musician here, but there's a company out there. Speaking of musician, I literally, Pete just hands me a pick as I'm walking up on stage. I'm like, thanks, Pete. Shout out to Pete. Make more. And so there's this company out there called Sweetwater. Sweetwater is a multi-billion-dollar company, and they're based in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Basically, I think Fort Wayne is Sweetwater. That's how big Sweetwater is. And they're the largest instrument and audio seller on the planet, but it didn't used to always be like that. And I was able to bring on Chuck, who is actually the founder and CEO. He agreed to come on my podcast like 6 months ago or something. It took 6 months to get him on, but he came on, and we talked about a lot of stuff. And what was so interesting to me is how he created a company that I would consider a heart-to-heart company. And he personally responded to the email that I sent him, which I was blown away. I was like, Chuck, I'm a huge fan. I buy all my music gear. Our church has bought like $100,000 in music gear from you guys, and I'd love to have you on to talk about stuff. And he personally responds. He said, yep, my Suzanne, my assistant, I see her on here. She'll coordinate with you. Excited, Josh. And it was the most incredible experience. I'm like, the fact that Chuck would talk to me, that doesn't scale, right? But he also has a multi-billion-dollar company, the largest seller of those products. And what's really cool about Sweetwater to me, and what I've taken a lot from, and he talked about this in the podcast, you should go listen to it, is with Sweetwater, it doesn't matter if you're placing a $15,000 order, like we've placed, or you're buying $20 guitar strings. It doesn't matter how much you spend. You have a designated, the moment you place purchase number one, you have a rep, and that is your rep until that rep leaves or you die. That's pretty much it. So I've worked with this guy named Brian for about 9 years now. Anything I buy, Brian is all over the page. Like he is like Brian's down here. If you have questions, just ask Brian. I have Brian's cell phone number. Brian emails me. If I buy $20 strings or buy $15,000 in gear, Brian will call and he will leave a voicemail. And then he'll shoot me a text to let me know he left a voicemail. And then he'll shoot me an email to let me know if I have any questions. As soon as my stuff arrives, I receive a call from Brian and he leaves a voicemail. I receive a text from Brian and I receive an email from Brian. Say, if you have any questions about how to set it up, any questions about the gear, if you need us to support, like tech support it for you, just let us know. We'll be happy to have someone help. I'm like, I just bought $20 guitar strings, dude. Like, that's pretty crazy that you do that. But that's the level of experience that they do. And in doing so, they also give their sales, they call them sales engineers, they give them the ability to make decisions, and this is bizarre to me. He said even the janitor in their company is allowed to gift a guitar to somebody if he feels in his heart that it's the right thing to do. And so he said he'll have janitor, and he said he has stories of this. He said he had a janitor that somebody actually came to their facility and they were really distraught because they'd saved all this money, and like the guitar wasn't like, there was issues with it, and he said the janitor was able to just like gift a guitar to that person. I'm like, ooh, that's crazy. Like some of those guitars, like if you don't know how good expensive guitars get, they can get expensive real quick. Like you might be in the multi-thousands pretty quick depending on the type of guitar. And so he gives them the ability to do this. And I think it's amazing because I believe that we should start to strive to be heart-to-heart companies. Like again, if you look at Disney, that's what they are. They're heart-to-heart in the way that they value relationship over transaction. And so I kind of wrote down a list of ideas I'd love to read off here. Like, how do you value others? And here's what I came up with. You listen actively, you personalize your approach. And a lot of times, like if we were to take that and relate to business, like listen, what does actively listening look like? Some of you might do a survey, some of you might not at all. Maybe the survey is like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you recommend us? That's our survey, by the way. You all get that when you submit your revenue every month, and we ask a simple survey for NPS is what it's called, Net Promoter Score. But what if you ask open-ended questions? What if you start to understand how they actually perceive you, and you listen actively to become better? It's interesting because a lot of times we receive email. Does anyone receive emails from dumb customers that have zero common sense? Okay. If you're not raising your hand, you're a liar, or you haven't had a single order in your life. And so we look at these customers that send us stuff, and we're like, oh. There's an FAQ. There are 6 emails you've received breaking down exactly the delivery timeline and how to use the product. I could have personally called you and knocked on your door and said, hey, here's how to use the product, driven back to my office, and I'd have an email by 7:30 p.m. that says, hey, I don't know how to use the product. And then like we're like frustrated. We're like, like customers, they're so dumb, and we get so frustrated by them, but sometimes you can't help stupidity. Like some stupidity just exists, and it's like, sorry, can't get around that. But what if we actually looked at it and said, well, how can I make this better? Because this person feels a certain way for a certain reason. And if I reflect and say, how can I become better? How can I tailor or improve my approach versus just being upset about it? That's what heart-to-heart looks like. It looks like saying, hey, I could do this better versus passing the blame to the customer. That's real easy. Like that's the easy thing to do, to be like, oh, well, the customer's dumb, right? It's a lot harder to be like, well, to be fair, we could do this. To be fair, we don't send them any text messages. To be fair, we don't have anything after it delivers. To be fair, I don't leave them a voicemail. I don't shoot them a text. Some people here are like, I am not texting a customer. But that's what listening actively and personalizing your approach looks like. Another way you value others is to offer to help without expecting anything in return. That's really hard to do. Because like, to take your time and thoughtfully craft a response to maybe someone that hasn't bought from you yet, by the way, because sometimes you get those emails. People like send their whole life story about why they need this and why they can't afford this or whatever that is, or questions they have about it, and you're like, just buy the product. It's like $9. Like, I don't want to take all this time to respond to this $9 product question that you have. But that's what it takes. Because in that scenario, you're only giving and responding with this expectation, with an expectation that they would have to buy a lot more for it to be worth your time. But if you offer help without expecting anything in return, the good part is you're not let down because your expectation isn't there. The good part is they feel appreciated, they feel cared for, they feel valued. And I don't know if anyone has had a situation like this, but sometimes you get these nasty emails or you get whatever from someone and the text comes off like they literally want to drive to your house and shoot you because they're that angry. And then you just realize, oh, that's just how they type, because the moment you get on the phone with them, they're like the nicest person ever and they really weren't that mad, but you were like, like I'm so upset by these people. And so that kind of leads me to the way you value others is just show empathy. It's pretty easy to do too. Like it doesn't take a whole lot of work to be like, hey, let me put your shoes on for like 6.5 seconds and just say, okay, I could see how it wasn't super clearly communicated. I can see how you entered the wrong email when you were buying and checking out. That's why you don't have any receipt or order instructions. But I've done that before. I've made the mistake. I could see how you didn't turn on or set the right settings for the ad lab and the automations didn't fire, or I could see how you didn't do the conversion lab campaign properly and you put your existing customer budget cap at like 99% and you're wondering why it's just hammering your customers, because I can't say I've done that, but I've done that stuff, right? And so I think that you need to show empathy. You need to be consistent in your actions. It's easy to just do it one-off, be like, I'm doing it for one person. But what if you just challenge yourself and said, hey, I'm gonna put on a whiteboard over here, I want 100 tallies of me thoughtfully, kindly responding to the dumbest things ever, right? Get to 100, it'll take a while. Well, depends. Some of you get a lot more emails than I do, but you'll get there, right? And what happens when you thoughtfully, kindly, empathetically, consistently respond to people, you're gonna build great loyalty. Like the amount of times that we've had people that like, it's so easy to just be like, it's not worth our time to even talk to them. And then suddenly you're like, you know what? Let's hear them out, let's talk to them. And suddenly they become the most loyal person on the planet because you took that time. And then the final thing I would say, the way you value others is just be super transparent and honest. Things go wrong. It's easy to say like, well, shipping got off, oh, UPS, whatever, and it's just own it. It's a lot easier to do that, and people appreciate that when you're just honest about stuff, that this didn't go according to plan, et cetera. And so heart-to-heart companies, I believe, speak to hearts, not only brains, and this requires a lot of, and I think there should be a little carrot there, and then you can insert whatever word you want, work. Human to human or heart to heart companies speak to hearts, not only brains, and this requires a lot of freaking work. It is so much work to do that. And it doesn't seem worth it because it doesn't scale. And we always think in terms of like, oh, does this scale? And my time is worth more than this, but it's so interesting when you actually take the time to slow down, to respond to people, to be empathetic, to do those things, that you actually begin to scale as a byproduct of doing that. But you don't think it because it's not instantaneous. And so we have to speak to hearts, not only to brains. Brains are a lot of us are super logical. Just ask my wife, Kelsey, about me. I am the most, I can logic any situation. I can logically do it, but sometimes you gotta speak to hearts. And hearts are not as logical as brains. And sometimes you have to do that, and that's what's required. And so to help with this, the lens that I've started viewing everything through is a simple measurement for things that Disney calls, and it's a really interesting concept, called bumping the lamp. Has anybody heard of the concept? Has anybody heard of bumping the lamp that are not super Disney nerds here? Bumping the lamp. All right, well, hey, you're all gonna learn about it in your book. And it's one of my favorite parts of the entire book, because there's a video in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And there's this famous scene where like it's live action integration with animation. And that was like really groundbreaking at the time. And so there's this scene that I want to play, and I want to see if you kind of observe something. Because again, if you want to speak to hearts and you want to look through the lens of building and creating an experience that people feel, but they don't know why they feel that. You do something and the customer feels a certain way, but they don't necessarily know why they feel that. A prime example is this little piece right here, and this is called bumping the lamp. So there's this one part of it. I don't know if you have a screenshot of this. Watch his ears and watch this shadow. You see that shadow right there? Very subtle. So when they did this, there was an integration of live with the animation. And animation doesn't experience the shadow cast from a physical thing. So the animators had this, we would think it's no big deal, right? We wouldn't notice it, but you see it in your brain thinks things in certain ways. And so you'll notice there's a lot of shading and shifting of color on the animation. That's part of it. But like the big thing is like, there's this big debate that they had. They're like, okay, so when he's swinging Roger Rabbit, the light is here. Well, there should technically be a shadow of him on the backdrop as well as his ears and moving with with where the light is placed. But that's really hard to do because he's obviously like moving it and it's not an actual shadow. So they had to ask the question, do we hand animate a gazillion shadows frame by frame for the shadow that's getting cast on a fake thing that doesn't exist? And it became known, they ultimately decided to do it, and it became known as this concept of bumping the lamp. And so internally, Disney refers to it as bumping the limb because it's something that people feel and they see and they experience, but they don't know why. Obviously, I would not expect anybody here. By the way, you didn't fail. That was a test made to make you feel like you failed. Because nobody would notice it. It's so small, it's so subtle, but it's just, it was based on principle that they decided, you know what? We don't have to do this. 99.99% of people will never, ever notice that we don't do this because they wouldn't know that we should do this. And think about your business. What things are you're like, there'd be a lot of work to do. I shouldn't do that. Nobody would really notice or observe it. But if you did it, people may not mention it, but they're going to feel it. They're going to feel the experience that you have. And so it's a lens that I've started viewing through things through, which is really interesting. And I want to share something with all of you that you don't know, but this is in our team. I took a video of it yesterday, and they thought I shouldn't show it. So I'm not. So I'm just going to talk it through against their orders. But yesterday, our team was sitting huddled around for like 30 minutes around our counter in the Airbnb with picture by picture of every one of your faces with no name next to it. And we're playing Guess That Client. Molly Goodall, Zach Brewer, Pete Bickmore, Jill Winter. So we were doing that. You don't all know that. When you all came in last night, none of you had name badges on, and we called you all by name. We didn't have to do it. We could have got to know you and said hello. I know all of you. I didn't have to play that game. Bree pretty much knows all of you. You didn't have to play the game. But not all of our team interfaces with you guys every single day, right? And so we try to ask the question, like, to us, to make you feel like you matter, I believe being called by name is very important and being recognized in that. And it sounds subtle. We didn't do it, no one here would have been like, I walked in and Andrew didn't know my name. No, none of you would have thought that. You would have interfaced with yourselves. No one would have thought twice about it. But you can do things that make people feel a certain way, even if they don't know why they feel a certain way and why that happens. And so this is a lens that we've really started looking things through. And what's really cool, I want to give you a couple of other examples before we do a little fun thing here. In Magic Kingdom, as you kind of walk down Main Street, USA, Disney bumps the lamp in a lot of ways that you may feel, well, you may know if you know Disney lore and everything about everything Disney, like some people in this room, but most of you are going to walk in there and they're going to bump the lamp and you're not going to know why you feel the way that you feel. Like you watch the fireworks show or you go to like any of the things, and when you watch them, some of you attend them and watch the stuff and you're like, I feel really good. When I'm here, there's just nostalgia. There's all kinds of things. There's no trash anywhere. I don't see people taking trash out. Because they don't usually take trash out in front of people. And the way that they do things, they point in a certain way. They don't point with one finger because one finger can become offensive. They'll wave, they'll use two fingers. Notice anybody ask for directions just for fun, and they're gonna do this. Even Kate, we're in here. I'm like, hey, Kate, where can we pull up? She's like, so you're gonna be right over here. They use two fingers. You don't know why, but in certain cultures, it's offensive if you use one finger. And so they bump the lamp in a lot of ways. And there are a few ways that I think are really interesting regarding Main Street. So they use, for example, forced perspective architecture. So they kind of use this to make buildings appear a lot larger than they are. So like when you look at the castle, this is how they do it, right? 7/8 scale, 5/8 scale, half scale. And so it makes everything seem a lot bigger. You don't know why. Like we all look up at it and we're like, oh, that's like an epic castle. But they use forced perspective. So you look at these windows down here and they look obviously they'd have to be the same size as the windows up there, but those are half the scale. So they use things like forced perspective. They use music. So like when you walk into Main Street, you'll hear music playing. You may not think about it. You might be in a conversation. You might be strolling through, and there's music that's playing, but you don't know why I feel like this. And maybe it's like just it's a tune that like just makes you feel a certain way. You can pull out emotion a lot. We all know this, right? You can pull out a lot of emotion with music. Last night was an example of that. They start playing music, and then it gets to the song, and then you see Heather. Yeah, and then this you hear that, and you get a little nervous. You're like, oh, what's going to happen? Da-na-na-na-na. So you walk in, and you just feel good. You're like, oh, and then you hear Up. I love Up, by the way. Now, to be fair, Up is also Pixar, right? But you feel a certain way when you hear music. And so music is one, but there's also smell. They pump smell on. They pump smells of like the bakery. They pump smells of popcorn. You don't realize that. You're like, oh yeah, it's the bakery. No, they pump that in there. All of you are in Coronado Springs. When you first walked in, now you're used to it now. They have a certain smell of Coronado Springs. And Doreen knows that more than everybody. There's literally smells in every hotel that you're at. They have a certain smell that fits the theme that they believe will make you feel a certain way based on that theme. It's kind of interesting. They do, when you like walk in, they have when you're walking down Main Street, they have like this, you're turning the corner and they intentionally orchestrated a reveal of the castle in the most perfect way. Like, look, that's just like a movie right there. Go figure, they make a lot of movies. And so the slow reveal of the castle is very, very intentional. And so they kind of have this mix of like excitement. You have this feel of nostalgia. You smell certain things. So they orchestrate all of the senses to make you just feel immersed and to make you actually feel the experience, but you don't know why you're feeling that experience. And you know what's interesting is like Disney led the way. That wasn't like a thing. They had to like create that thing, right? And so for you and your business in e-commerce, I want to challenge all of the MPM, and there's gonna be a lot of stuff we keep doing moving forward. How do we become heart to heart, human to human, H to H, however you want to interchange those. I use both of them interchangeably right now. And so like, how do we create that in a way that looks different like than other businesses? And there's a lot of ways to do that, but sometimes it takes thinking and ingenuity and just breaking the grounds of what is normal in order to make that happen. One final example, and then we're gonna play a game here. You may not also realize this, but you all have a lanyard on, and then in your bag, if you wanna pull this out, you have another lanyard. I want you to take this lanyard and put it up to the lanyard around your neck really quick. These are both from the same exact company. And so we ordered the first ones, and they came in like this. And my first thought was, did somebody just take a Sharpie and just smudge every single design on this, or what? And we had this internal conversation about it. Because what that would mean is we would have to go and rebuy all of the lanyard, like 100 lanyards at a time that we had to buy for everybody, and it wasn't crazy expensive, but like we would have to go buy all these new custom branded lanyards. And we're like, well, would you guys actually care if you don't really look at it a lot, you would just put this on, you wouldn't think a whole lot about it. But I'm like, it's not bumping the lamp, and I'm giving a talk on bumping the lamp, and I would look like a big hypocrite if we did this. And so we just reprinted everything. And you would never have known that we printed these, but what you're wearing is us saying we're not settling for less than greatness in the experience we're trying to create while all of you are here, because that's what makes life way better. It's what will hopefully make you guys more loyal and stay forever and ever and never leave and refer everybody to us so we never have to run ads. That's the goal, right? And so it's interesting because we always think in terms of what scales, but what you should do in the long run generally doesn't scale in the beginning. And what you do in the beginning will help you scale in the long run. And it's really hard to have that frame of thinking because it's very counterintuitive to what we learn and what we read and what we see, because we're always thinking in terms of scaling, and we're like, dude, you just launched like 2.5 weeks ago and you're just getting going. Don't even be thinking about scaling. Most of us here should not be thinking about scaling. I am not thinking about scaling. You know, we think of scaling in a very particular way because everyone says scale like a super sexy word, but scaling is never how it looks. It's not like you just climb the mountain. You don't go straight up. You got all these switchbacks, and then you like to backtrack, and then you like start yelling at each other because someone gave the wrong directions, someone took the wrong exit, and then you got to keep going. And so some of you can relate to that. And so I believe we need to start focusing on it being heart to heart or H-to-H companies, and in a way that it doesn't scale in the beginning, but in the long run, as a byproduct of doing those things, we will achieve the profits, the revenue growth, and the lives that we actually want with a high degree of satisfaction, knowing that I have people that love me, that never want to leave, that only buy my products and refer a ton of people to me. And as a result of that, they're happy, I'm happy, my team's happy, they're proud to work for a company that does things just like that. So all of you have Be Our Guest. I encourage you to read it. I know some people aren't readers in here. I know that I used to be a bigger reader than I am now, but this book is incredible. It walks through a lot of the stuff. It talks through bumping the lamp probably like way better than I could describe it and the reason and the stories behind it. But it's one of my favorite books because it's about building magical customer experiences that truly foster like heart-to-heart connection.